Thousands of years ago, under a dome of stars, our ancestors ventured out into the vast, unexplored waters of their ocean world. They crafted voyaging canoes with natural materials and stone tools. They felled large trees for the hulls, braided senet for the lashings, and wove lauhala for the sails. The whole community helped build these vessels that carried them for weeks on the open sea. Legendary navigators guided the canoes to distant islands and returned home to share their discoveries. Their survival depended on knowing the paths of the stars and the rhythms of the ocean. By 1000 AD, they had left their footprints on every habitable island in the far corners of the Pacific. They carried with them all they would need to recreate the world they had left behind: fragile seedlings to plant, young animals to breed, sacred traditions of ritual and worship, and ancient stories of wisdom and genealogy.
Western thinking would not accept that Polynesians could sail that far and navigate purposefully, because if that were true, then Polynesians and Hawaiians would become the greatest navigators on the earth. They would have been the greatest navigators, the greatest explorers in their time, because no other culture on the earth was sailing that far. That makes sense? So basically, from the very beginning, Western culture was not willing to accept the intelligence and the courage and the strength of the world's greatest explorers.
Hokulea is a replica of an ancient Polynesian sailing canoe. The Hawaiian community built Hokulea to show that our traditional vessel could be navigated over long distances without modern instruments. Herb Kane designed Hokulea. His stories and paintings have taught young Hawaiians about our voyaging history.
Polynesians were the only deepwater sailors in the world for at least 2,000 years. The ocean was their own world and their only world. So they weren't really afraid of it in the same way that Europeans were afraid of it. We felt that by rebuilding what was the central object of Polynesia and putting it to active, hard use, that this would inspire a general revival of Polynesian culture.
Many of us saw the canoe Hokulea as a precious link to that past and to the seafaring people who first came to our islands.
Once Hokulea was constructed and put to sea, we had the tool. We had a tool for learning, one in which we haven't had for centuries. But we really required a teacher, a navigator, one that could blend the information and the experience required for us to get the competence to sail and voyage. And that's where we needed Maupiailug.
Maupiailug is from the island of Satawal in Micronesia. He could do what the skeptics said was impossible: guide a canoe across long distances using only the stars, the sun, the moon, and the ocean swells. When he came to Polynesia, he carried with him thousands of years of traditional knowledge.
Oh, I learned from my grandfather. When I was small, about maybe I'm 5 years old, and I started learning from my grandfather.
Since he began studying with Mao about 20 years ago, Nainoa has become a master in his own right. He has navigated Hokulea more than 50,000 miles to many of the major island groups in Polynesia. Hokulea was made of mostly modern materials. Now our community wanted to build a canoe with resources native to Hawaii, the same materials our ancestors had used. The new canoe would be called Hawaiiloa. Her first long-distance voyage would retrace an ancient migration route from the Marquesas Islands to Hawaii.
We went to our forest to look for the koa trees that would be big enough for the house. What we found was that the ecosystem, which once maintained healthy koa trees, had been so altered, so damaged over the last 100 years that we could not even find a single tree that was big enough to make one house.
The Tlingit and Haida Indians offered us 2 spruce trees from their forests in southeast Alaska. Like us, the native Alaskans have rich traditions of respect for the natural world. The tree felling ceremony asked forgiveness for taking a valued life from the forest. The attempt to build Hawaii Loa with all natural materials was only partially successful. Our island's natural resources have been too diminished. We could not produce enough senet for the lashings or lauhala for the sails. The new canoe had to go through months of shakedown sails to work out any problems in her structure and performance. To ensure the survival of traditional navigation, a younger generation was invited to train for the voyage. Among these student navigators were several women, including Pi'ikea Miller.
For those of us that are just learning and know so little, it's all about science and math. But I think when you're a master like Mao, it's much less of a science and much more of an art.
Well, the celestial spheres is really this dome that's overhead. It's totally overhead that places the stars and the stars and the sun and the moon and the planets are placed in it. And it basically, the whole dome with all these heavenly bodies rises up in the east, comes across you somewhat overhead, and sets in the west. Study of navigation centers on Mao's star compass. This is the foundation for successful deep-sea navigation. When you look at the star compass, you're looking at it as if you're on the canoe, looking out to the open ocean. It divides the ocean horizon into 32 points. These points are defined by the rising and setting places of certain steering stars. In Mao's concept of navigation, he doesn't even think about the canoe going to another island. He conceives pointing the canoe in a certain direction and bringing the island to the canoe. There's a whole body of information about reading signs of the animals in the sea, birds, sea life, different coloration of clouds as you approach our island. It's called expanded landfall. How do you know that an island is close without it physically seeing the island? By looking at the different signs of nature, especially the animals that behave differently near islands in the ocean.
This place, the Marquesas, is of the first people. Being here is very, very special. For me, it's almost sacred, like a religious pilgrimage, that you know your roots are here. That sometime very, very long ago, somebody and some people left these shores, and today I am who I am because of those people taking that step from these shores. And I think it's a very appropriate place for all the navigators to make this rite of passage, to go back where your ancestral roots are, and then to travel down that ancient seaway and find your homeland once again.
What I hear you saying is, yeah, you want to go if you knew how, so I'm assuming that you're saying that you're willing to be students. Yeah. I'll put it this way, if you're not willing to learn, you'll never make it. Because ultimately, this canoe is about learning. It's a platform for learning.